run through this at about 2x until we get to the good stuff, if that's okay.
Yeah, you go.
The presentation I'd done back in June, the art of the pivot, the premise being that you can tell it's June because I speak of hunting big game trends in the post-COVID era, thinking back in June that we were post-COVID. Clearly, we are not post-COVID.
Apparently, it keeps on going. The gift that keeps giving.
Exactly right. But I would say in the COVID era certainly is accurate. And of course, that's me. I will zoom through this just real briefly. It walks through it. This is my background. We can, I mean, Jim, you already know it. Justice, you already know it. And we can talk about this ad nauseum later if we need to. But I did want to talk a bit about the demography. I don't need to belabor this. We're all aware of it. I just saw another article yesterday that kind of drove home this point, that the baby boomers, the people born between 64 and 46, are starting to age. I am the youngest of them. I'm born in 64, so at 57, I've got, I would say, hopefully I've got a good 30, 40 years left in me, but we're going to be, right now we're hitting 65 at the rate of about 11,000 per day, which is an astonishing number. But you've also got millennials who are maturing, and at a rate of about 12,000 a day, hitting 25. And many of them are starting to think about starting families, settling down, buying houses, etc. And then the final dynamic is the longer lifespans, where there's research that shows, and I think it was done by researchers even in places outside of MIT, that technically speaking, the human lifespan could be somewhere between 120 to 150 theoretically. We're not there yet, but and I think we actually took a step backward in the last couple of last year or so and a half. I think the lifespan in the US actually dropped for the first time in a while. But anyway, we could be living longer and wanting to live those longer years, ideally healthier, and in a situation where we can enjoy ourselves more. Financially, the overseas interest in the US market is considerable. I know China's having some issues today.
Some.
Yeah, I checked recently to see if things had completely collapsed, but there's no question that almost all of the investors I've talked to who are operating in and around China had been for quite some time looking to get money out of that market and into the US market just because they wanted a bit more stability, political stability, currency stability, and potentially the opportunity to immigrate to the US. And it can't be overstated that there's a ton of wealth that's going to change hands from boomers to their to the next generation, the millennials, and that's happening now and will continue to happen over the next 30 years. And then lastly, this geographic trend, COVID has reminded us or instructed us that we don't necessarily have to live where we work, that we can potentially live an hour or two or three from where the job is if we can phone it in or computer it in or internet it in more and more, that if we can work from home, it really doesn't matter where we live, or it doesn't matter as much. And so great reshuffling was intended to acknowledge the fact that people are reconsidering where they want to live. And that speaks to a lot of the exodus from the coasts into the heartland, into the Sun Belt. People are also looking to achieve, they always have been, achieve a better life-work balance. And can't deny it, climate change, whatever your political beliefs, or at least agree that extreme weather is becoming more and more of a factor. And when whether it's hurricanes or freezing rain and ice in Houston or wildfires in California, it's something that everybody's taking into account, or should be taking into account as they decide their future moves. And so I talked at the time about what I call the three elephants in the post-COVID world. And in my opinion, from my perspective, they are technology, real estate, and healthcare. And at this time, because I'm a tech guy, because I'm a real estate person, because I was kind of dragged into the healthcare field because of the situation with my mother-in-law. These happen to be mine. I'm not suggesting these are the only three, but these are the ones that were on my radar screen. And I think that that each of these three is significantly large and evolving, that it could easily occupy the rest of my life, and I would never master any of these three, but it would certainly be a whole lot of fun to swim in the pool with these three elephants. And I talked about some of the opportunities that I saw with the inevitable Venn diagram that I think is required for any presentation, which is to say the A region was the intersection of healthcare and real estate, and that was the residential. An example would be residential assisted living and travel nurse housing. I would also add now things like midwife business. I ran into an operator of a midwifery in Wisconsin, not Milwaukee, but in Wisconsin. And I had no idea that was a thing. Not only is it a thing, they're doing booming business. Millennials are having babies at not alarming, but at an ever increasing rate, which is great for their business. And they're seeing some of the same challenges that other businesses are seeing. And so that's something that again, my antenna went up when she mentioned that. Healthcare and technology, things like telemedicine and assistive technologies. At the time when my mother-in-law suffered a stroke, we looked into, there's a technology that lets you work a computer, or at least work a mouse, with a device that attaches to your hand. It's a Bluetooth device that lets you, it takes the place of a mouse for those people who have, in her case, for example, she lost the ability to move on her right side. And so she had a little bit limited left-hand mobility, and we were hoping that we could use that to help her communicate. Didn't work so well for her, but I understand technologies like that are being used to help those who are suffering through medical challenges to enjoy more of their life and recover faster. And that has always fascinated me. And I would also argue that healthcare and technology overlap in something that you don't see a whole lot of here in the US. You see more in other countries like Japan, but robotics. The idea of a robot assistant that can, much like a service animal, can help you get out of bed, or keep you from falling down, or pick up things that are too heavy for you to pick up. And that's something that, again, I anticipate there being a huge opportunity in, as there's more of a demand for it. Right now it's expensive because there's not a lot of demand. I think as the baby boomers get older and more of them need this kind of stuff, you'll see more of those things hitting the market affordably. Real estate and technology, obviously prop tech, work from home, all the technologies that go behind that, Zoom being an example of them, that facilitate people being able to stay home and do constructive work. Healthcare, I guess this is the triple play of healthcare and real estate and technology. An example being medical telemetry and patient telecom in facilities. We had an experience with this, my wife and I. We were often in a situation where my mother-in-law would be at night sleeping, and it would have been great to have someone monitor her while she slept, make sure that she's breathing properly, make sure that that her heart rate is okay, make sure that all the medical metrics that are important for her. And an exhausted caregiver can't do that. They've got to sleep at some point. Someone's got to sleep at some point. And so the idea, we actually toyed with the idea of looking into remote facilities, maybe in the Philippines someplace, where someone just sits there at a monitor and just watches the numbers for someone who's in the US in their nighttime sleeping, so that if there's an issue, someone can call a doctor or wake up the caregiver. And so that kind of quasi-telemetry application, I definitely saw the need for it. If someone had such a
Yeah, that's actually extremely and immediately applicable. If someone were to wake up tomorrow and say, hey, look, there's a service and it's affordable and it made sense, well, it was exactly the way you described it without too many strings attached. That's actually something that can be implemented like yesterday.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
It's definitely doable. The if someone has such a service right now, they're doing a horrible job of marketing.
Yeah,
We would happily pay.
I haven't heard of it. So.
Yeah, we would happily pay for that, just because we ended up getting a baby monitor that would sit in our room so that we could hear her breathing and hope that that things would be okay. But yeah, so the opportunity. This is not at all an exhaustive list by any stretch. There are for each one of these, there's probably 100 things that I'm missing that is going to be viable for someone. But we're all entrepreneurial minded here on the call, and so my thing was just to kind of stir the pot a little bit and get people thinking about some of these opportunities. Because when I said technology back in June, I was thinking largely of the technology that I grew up with, which is computers and circuits and bits. And while I think that's still going to continue to be relevant, I think the technology that's going to be far more relevant, we're discovering, is going to be biology and chemistry and germs and viruses and the things that, rather than the physics and the engineering that I studied, it'll be the chemistry, the organic chemistry, and the bio that I avoided like the plague when I could. But it's clear that that's going to be way more important, or at least as important as circuits and bits and bytes were in the 80s, 90s, and now. And it's going to have a significant impact on how we live and everything we do. And so this was kind of in my mind, the payoff slide for the pivot presentation. This was really all that preamble was to get to here. And this is kind of where I wanted to talk today. I think there's probably not a whole lot left on here. We talked about it's just resources. Okay, so really this was the key slide. And when Jim, when Justice and I started talking about this, and again, I'm definitely late to the party. He was already well on his way to doing this kind of stuff, and I was just kind of playing catch up. But the healthcare real estate, the notion of a residential, of a single family house that could be purposed, that is specifically designed to serve 5, 6, 7, 8 residents that are being financed either through insurance or private pay to live in a quasi-family arrangement. That I had no understanding of that model. And so Justice broke down not only the concept, but also, which was mind-blowing for me, the numbers, the financials and correct me if I'm wrong, Justice, that in Georgia, you're looking at somewhere between potentially $2,000 to $4,000 per resident that an operator can receive under a residential assisted living personal care home arrangement.
Oh, that's right. And it's also area dependent. So in an area, for instance, we'll use Georgia as an example, in South Georgia, so we're looking like south of 20. So for instance, let's say Henry County, Clayton County, areas like that, you're going to command a lower amount because more individuals are going to be on either various waiver programs, sponsored federal programs sponsored via the Department of Community Health, or which command around that, the lower ballpark, whereas in northern Georgia, so we'll look at like Alpharetta, Johns Creek, areas like that, you're going to command a higher amount. So that's all relative to the real estate price too, right? So for instance, in the south of Atlanta, you're going to have a lower, on average, a lower purchase price as opposed to, let's say, the northern part of Atlanta. So that's going to be, commensurate with that same exact thing, because that's determined by the clientele normally. So yeah, but yeah, that 2,000 to 4,000 is reasonable. You can even command higher in the northern parts. As we had spoke to with some people who have facilities in the northern part of Atlanta.
Yeah, it is expensive. Everyone knows it's expensive. Everyone who's got a family member who's in a long-term care facility of any type knows it gets very expensive. And if we can help offset those costs while maintaining the economics of a smaller facility, it just helps as well. My mother is going into a similar, memory care facility, and my cousin's mother is now, my aunt is now in a memory care facility as well near Indianapolis, and it's $4,000 a month. That includes her daily wine as
That's
well.
actually reasonable too, because we actually had not too long ago a colleague of ours had an individual leave a nursing home, and I think the lady that came to them, she was spending I think $8,000 per month,
Wow.
and so. And now she's paying, I think I'd have to get with him about it, but I think that cost is now slashed in half in the residential. So you don't have to gouge your residents. That's the thing a lot of these individuals don't seem they're gouging these residents. It's like, how you would need to be a millionaire to be able to afford because I mean, to comfortably afford $8,000 a month, you would have to be a millionaire already. I mean, you'd have to be, you have to be comfortably a millionaire, and which most people are not, right? And that would have to outlast you for, well, I mean, now people are living a lot longer. I mean, people aren't even if they're on terminal care, they're still not passing on in 2 months, 3 months. They're lasting years. People aren't just passing on quickly. I mean, medical care is a lot better. They're able to have an on-call nurse. So if you have any issues or problems, so people aren't passing on even quickly, spending $8,000 a month. So you're expecting that to last anywhere from 5 to 10 years.
So Justice, to your point there, if I can jump in, in my line of work, which is the mortgage business, I follow a lot of economists, right? And the economists these days are all, Mitch, to your point earlier, the economists are all talking about healthcare and economics, macroeconomics and personal economics, both, but hand in hand. More and more and more I see that. And part of the reason is what you alluded to, Mitch, which is biotech and the advances we've seen in biotech, but also the advances that are coming. I mean, I've seen a lot of economists saying, if you want to invest in biotech right now, yeah, there's wonderful things on the horizon, maybe kind of for like spinal injuries and helping people walk again and doing that. But that's sci-fi at the moment. But what is real and is on the horizon is possibly even curing heart disease, which is the #1 killer of males in the US today. And if we could cure heart disease, and that didn't exist anymore, we didn't die of a heart attack all of a sudden, well, what would that do for the length of life, right? Yep. But right in there becomes economics, personal economics, like to your point, Justice, how many people have the ability to pay for these every month for long term, but also our economics, investor economics, right? Investor opportunity. And I think there's a complex that it's amazing. It's like the 3 circles come together again, but it's really a complex of at least 2 of those circles, which is real estate and healthcare, together with economics, and saying we can really, investors have the opportunity to make money, but also do good right now and really serve a need that isn't really being served very well right now.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I agree. And to your point, Jim, what was surprising to me is that the cost of the big box facilities, care facilities, wasn't cheaper. We were quoted when Tsunami was going through this, we were quoted between 6,000 to 8,000 ourselves per month for facilities, for the big box facilities. And so it's not like you're getting it's not like there's an economy of scale that's operating here that says, okay, for the larger facilities, you get a price break because you're choosing those. And since they're less desirable, you'd think that once more people are aware of them, that there will be a much greater pull toward these smaller facilities. I mean, certainly from the operator standpoint, they make more money. But from the desirability of the facility for the customer, they would much prefer to be in a 8-person single-family home, personal care home arrangement than a 200-person impersonal facility. And so I think the reason why the economics, the personal economics, aren't reflecting, in my opinion, preferences, is that the people who are in the homes right now don't really have a vote. They are there because we, their children, make the decision of where they're going to go. When you get to decide for yourself where you're going to go, and baby boomers are going to take the lead in this, and they're going to guide their own retirement like they've guided every other aspect of their lives. When you have a choice, no one is going to, or few people are going to choose to go into the big box arrangements. They're going to try their best to do the single family home thing or something like that for as long as they possibly can. And there's not nearly enough supply for them to do that yet, but I think that's where the trend is. And so if I were building facilities, I'd be building more of those smaller, maybe not 8, maybe 16, maybe 24, but not 200, 300, 400, just because I think baby boomers are going to demonstrate that they will flock to the more intimate, more personalized experience than the big boxes. And I think that's going to impact where we as investors want to be. And I think it represents a shift, because again, right now, the people who are in these facilities aren't there because they chose to be. They're there because their kids put them there. I think as we baby boomers have a bit more agency in our care, at least we hope we will, we think we will, have a bit more agency in our care, and we'll be able to guide the decisions about where we go better than our parents did. One would hope.
Yes, I would agree with that. So Justice, I have a question for you, because you've got the experience in home healthcare facilities, right? Your family running them and yourself. My question to you is, there's real fixed costs as well, right? You have the technology and the medical costs, but you also have the personnel costs, and that depends on the level of care that someone needs, right? If it's really an assisted living, but they're kind of on their own, there's only so much care that they need and expect. But if it's memory care or full-on care or hospice, that's a whole different level. So I'd love for you to talk about the different economic needs as far as staffing needs and medical needs of the different levels of facilities, different levels of care, I would think.
Yeah, so a lot of we screen our residents for the type of care relative to our facility. So we don't take residents that pretty much are outside of our scope of care, and that's really at the discretion of each individual personal care home, even either personal care home or assisted living facility. So in our case, we always choose residents who are not going to require a ton of 24/7 nursing care. That will be reserved for pretty much a nursing home. That's where one of the big distinctions come in, to where things like, for instance, self-preservation, right? With the nursing home, the big difference is going to be being able to self-preserve. And so we don't choose residents mainly because, you could command, a higher, you could ask for maybe more income due to the type of needs that they'll require, but it may also require, once again, significant more staffing. So for instance, someone with a memory ailment, so some form of Alzheimer's. That's at the discretion of each individual facility. Like I said, in our case, we don't choose individuals who require that type of care, because it's more liability, it's more staffing, and then at that point your fixed costs outweigh everything else. I mean, staffing is not cheap at all. It really isn't, especially now where we actually had some colleagues that were having issues maintaining staff because the alternative was unemployment. They were able to get more unemployment than they were being in these type of, working in these type of facilities. So it's a balance between how large the facility is and then relative to what type of resident that you have. If it's too small of a facility, and you don't have a whole bunch of individuals who are at that higher rate, then you're not going to have a whole lot of staffing. That's not going to be practical. So you're going to want to go for individuals who are a little bit more independent. Whereas once again, on the other end of the scale, larger facilities, they can, like we had mentioned before, they're not changing their costs because they're still increasing how much staff they have. So that's kind of where we stand when it comes to choosing our residents and then balancing it with staff.
So the last time I was in the Midwest, I was visiting family over the summer, and I visited my brother-in-law in Ohio, and he said, hey, we were running out to get milk for the kids in the morning because breakfast has to happen. But he said, hey, let me run by this home that I've been keeping my eye on because I want to do something like it. And basically it looked like little townhomes. It was an L-shaped building with little individual condo townhome type individual units for each individual person living, but it had healthcare services on the premise, right? It had a nurse, I don't know, full-time. I didn't look into it long enough, but I think there's a lot to be said for that because it does two things for people who kind of need nursing care to look in on once in a while and help out, and maybe the technology piece as well, right? They're right there. If something goes wrong, they're alerted, right? Well, we've all seen those things in if you go into the bathroom in a hospital, there's the cord. If something goes wrong, you can pull it, and the nurse comes in and helps out. That type of thing, right? But at the same time, it's still individual living, and there's still camaraderie. Because when we drove by in the morning, it was a beautiful day in the summer, and 3 of the residents were sitting out on their front stoop chatting with one another. And so there's the camaraderie there as well. And I think there's a lot to be said for that. To your point, Justice, it's not full-on healthcare, it's not full-time nursing care that's needed, but it's just aging in place almost, really, with a bit of healthcare needs being satisfied.
That's right. And there are facilities like that are dedicated for that type of, pretty much somebody who they're not quite, they're way too pretty much early on in their I guess they're in the retirement age, but they're nowhere near nursing home level care. They're nowhere near, they wouldn't even qualify due to the fact that they're in good health. They don't need those type of services, so it wouldn't make sense for them to be there. They're more or less independent. They're ambulatory, they're able to walk. They just want, maybe they have high blood pressure or let's say slight memory issues, right? To where they'll forget certain things. Maybe somebody will come in. So that's a big, that's a good alternative. Of course, the price is commensurate with that. So, people are not necessarily able to always afford those type of services because they're significantly more than, let's say, a residential assisted living facility. I mean, you're looking at 5 to 6 to 7 to 8 times more, if not larger. We had there's like a facility in Covington, not too far, and their rates vary from $8,000 to $16,000 a month.
Wow.
So that's kind of the alternative. So it's not super cheap, and so it's cost prohibitive for a lot of people. So that's the only caveat, is that if we haven't looked too much into that, just because the scale, at that point you're having 40 to 50 to 60 to 80 to 100 residents on the actual campus. So it's a little bit larger scale than we're familiar with, but if the numbers can work for for each individual and the investors involved, I don't see a problem with that model either.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think there's an opportunity here for some sort of a modular approach to this. I hate to draw too much on my tech background, but if the big box is the mainframe model that was popular in the 50s and 60s, with this one gigantic computer that everybody comes to, something a bit more distributed, kind of the internet model or the PC model, where you have to your point, Jim, reconfigurable units as part of presumably on a ranch, so it's all one level, so you don't have the issues of getting upstairs, but you have units that would support, I guess this is the age-in-place concept, that would support whatever level of care is required by that particular resident. But if that resident moved out tomorrow, we could reconfigure that without a lot of expense to go back to, if you will, something that would be appropriate for somebody who didn't need that level of care. I know that when we were dealing with my mother-in-law, there were a lot of facilities that, for example, wouldn't take, because we looked at the personal care home concept for her, they wouldn't take folks in a wheelchair, or they wouldn't take folks who weren't mobile, who couldn't get out of their wheelchair. I mean, wheelchair was fine if you needed it to get around because you were feeble, but if you couldn't be roused, if someone had to carry you out of the house in the event of a fire, then they didn't want that liability. They didn't deal with she had a feeding tube. She because of her stroke, she couldn't swallow, so she required a feeding tube. So she was a higher maintenance client than most personal care homes could handle. But in a modular environment like this, you might have, if you had 16 of these pods, you might have 2 or 3 of them that were dedicated to folks who needed a bit more care, and then you could, perhaps place personnel that would cater to those folks who need that help down at that end of the facility, and in the other end where people didn't need as much help, you didn't need as much care. So something that would be adaptive to the needs of the resident, where it's not the premise is not that it's one big massive facility where everybody gets the same level of care, but in fact, something that's reconfigurable and modular so that you can deliver care in a distributed manner that suits the needs of that particular person. And yes, I think it'll be more expensive, and I would wonder if, Justice, if these facilities aren't more expensive just because there's so few of them, and so the supply-demand formula works in favor of these. They can charge $16,000 a month because they're the only one in the state or such. If they were,
it's a combination of both. It's a combination of the costs as well as the type of care, and the fact that there aren't there are a bunch of really large and high quality at that. I think the quality is something that also mentioned, because the ones that are high quality aren't empty. I'll tell you that. It's just hard to find the ones that are high quality, because a lot of them aren't doing not a lot of them, but the ones that we've seen, in some cases they aren't doing what they're supposed to do, even though they are the large big box places. You would think that they have a lot of things in place to prevent certain, like abuse or whatever the case, and that's just unfortunately not the case. But the large ones that are doing what they're supposed to do, yeah, they're not staying empty. They're always full, and if they I would be surprised they have long vacancy, or long waiting lists. So yeah, that model is perfect as long as pretty much all the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed. Those are completely viable and perfect alternatives to, or middle grounds between the really large facilities that only cater to one and the really small ones, facilities that can only cater to one type of individual. Yeah, those are completely viable.
So that's interesting you say that, because I live in Charleston, South Carolina, and we have a big VA hospital, and around the VA hospital are all the VA facilities. But one of the things that Charleston does really well, I would argue potentially even better than Atlanta, is the surrounding VA homes for elderly or ailing patients, right? Mm. The type of homes that we're talking about, they do have waiting lists because they're run really well. A couple of them in town we've toured because my in-laws are eligible for VA benefits and aging, and we see a need on the horizon, right? On the almost immediate horizon. And so we've toured a couple facilities, and they're run really well, and they have waiting lists, to your point, because, and I think I see a couple opportunities here from an economic investor standpoint to serve, because yes, if it's done well, the competition will weed out over time those facilities that are not. Pardon me. It can drive costs down, but I really see the interim, like you were talking, Mitch, at the modular type, townhome, single home, branch style living, but together, so you can have that scale of having a nurse on staff or something like that to care for, but not the full-time nursing patients, but the ones who are pretty much on their own. They just need a little bit of help with their health care. but they can function on their own, because one of the other things that does from an economic standpoint is, I think there's economics there that make total sense as far as rental income and other sources of income. But the other thing that it does that we haven't talked about, and I think is very, very important, is it helps that individual aging person, our parent, right now, cure or overcome loneliness, which I think is what a lot of elderly people are experiencing in this country right now, is extreme loneliness. And it puts a community together where it can really help that. And that can help health as well, I think. I'm not a doctor, nor do I play one on TV, but I think it can help.
No, I think you're absolutely right.
We've seen that firsthand, where residents would leave facilities, come to where we're at, and then their family members come and visit in a week or two. The first thing they almost always say is, "Wow, you're looking a lot better. You're looking a lot healthier." So that model of not being isolated in your room, to let whatever happens, where you're able to interact with people who are also aging in place. We've seen that pretty much firsthand, where people, that's what I mentioned before, people are living, even if they're on terminal, have a terminal illness, they're living a lot longer, because in certain types of instances, because of things like that. They're taking care of their bodies, they're healthy, they're happy, they're not depressed, they're getting off of some medications. We've had a resident, actually 2 residents, get off of medications because their blood pressure has stabilized, or things like that. That's actually not too, so what happened was, she was taking it was called lisinopril, was the medication. She was taking it pretty much every day. She was taking her blood pressure, or had the blood pressure machine checking it every day, so on and so forth. And then eventually she started getting weaned off of it. We would ask her how she slept every night. "Oh, I slept real fine, slept good." Getting fed the things that you need to be fed 3 times a day or even more. And that makes a massive difference. So, make a long story short, is that if the facility is designed in such a way where there is, of course, everybody's happy, right? So if the economies make sense from the investor perspective, it's not cost prohibitive for the residents, and they're able to have that level of interaction. You can't really beat that, right? That's the most optimal scenario, where everybody's happy.
Absolutely. That's the thing from the investor standpoint. I know we're addressing investors here, and obviously we're investors, right? So we don't have this preconceived or this misnomer, but I'm telling you, a lot of people in society have this misnomer that investors are some Ebenezer Scrooge that cares about money and nothing else. But the reason we're investors is to take care of our families, and a very close second is to help take care of and better society. And I think these opportunities do both. They allow an investor to make some money, but also do some good and really better society. So I love it. I love how the 3 can come together. I think there's a lot of room, to your point initially, Mitch, with the technology side of integrating that, and maybe even helping offset some of the real personnel costs, so we can give better service, reduce the costs, but also take care of the community of aging in place, right?
Yeah, I agree. And to your point, if you think about the healthcare industry, it is one of the few industries where there is very little accountability to the client. No one polls the folks living in these facilities about their satisfaction, and not to be crass, but the end game for their client base is such that they can deliver mediocre service for the rest of their lives and rarely get called out on it. We saw some horrific things in facilities where we weren't whistleblowers. We're just people there at night hearing folks calling for nurses that never came, and ringing the bell and never getting a response. And we saw, and again, this was one of the better facilities in Georgia. And so it's not like these people were trying to be abusive or horrible. It's just the nature of that particular beast is that it is very, very difficult to deliver what they're trying to deliver in that kind of an environment. It just doesn't serve, it doesn't scale well in that situation. It's also got to be said, and Justice has heard me say this before, that the marketing of the consumer experience of choosing, and you've probably experienced this yourself, Jim, of choosing a facility is frustrating it would be an understatement. There are very few reliable sources of honest feedback on the quality of these facilities. It's made very, very difficult to understand what really goes on in these things. So transparency is hardly existent. The marketing that these facilities do for themselves is pretty poor. So rare is it the case that even the large facilities maybe they'll have a website, and usually it'll be like 10 years old and barely have an email or a phone number. And so it's almost like these folks from the witness protection program, they don't want anyone to know how to reach them and how to hold a particular person accountable, and yet they are housing our precious loved ones. And you would think for that level of concern, we would demand, and maybe this is the trend, to see, kind of like what they do with daycare, to be able to see, pull up your phone and see your loved one, real-time video of your loved one in the facility doing okay and living their life, so that you can just make sure everything is okay with them. Because in the absence of that, it's a black box. They go in and you hardly ever find out what's going on. I suspect it was even worse during COVID when you couldn't even visit. And so
yeah.
The transparency is a concern that I have, because, and again, I think that's largely a function of the fact that the people who are the clients aren't necessarily people who are living in the facility. The client for most of these facilities is the person who's putting these folks into the facility, not the people themselves. They don't really care so much about the folks that are in there as they do about the folks who brought them to the facility, the children.
Yeah, that's a very interesting take, and I think that's where I don't know enough. I know that I don't know enough to weigh in, but I see the difficulty there, and we've seen it touring different facilities and whatnot. And on a knee-jerk reaction, I think Justice will have a better input here. I think all of us will say, as an investor / entrepreneur, yes, we need more communication with the extended family. But then you get dad who's having a grumpy bad day in the facility going, get that camera away from me, I don't want it, So there's a solution there. I don't know what it is, but I would be willing to go out on a limb and say, I think the solution is needed. I don't know what that is, and I don't think any of us will unless we invest and create these aging in place places and start testing and push the limits a little bit and see what makes the most sense. Because you're right, Mitch. The client really is us if we're paying for it and choosing the facility. But if it's really aging in place, it's really not us yet.
Right.
It's really our parents still.
Right.
And so, yeah, I see the need for that. You have to market a whole lot better. Healthcare has never been known well for marketing. Drug companies do a good job. Healthcare, not so much.
Yeah.
But I think that's where the entrepreneur / investor has to get in and figure it out.
Yeah, I agree. And I think to the extent that we will all have to become better consumers of this service, this healthcare service, I think the providers will have to get better at educating us so that we can be confident that we're making the best decision available with given the options that we've got. I'll just raise my hand and say, our family never felt that way about any of the choices that we made. We felt that we were always one or two steps behind in trying to figure out what was really going on, because you don't really get the real story until you're there and you're committed, and then you discover, oh, this is not what I wanted. And then you have to unravel the thing that you just spent all this time getting into. So I think to the extent that people become more educated about what the options are and be aware that you don't have to that the big box is only one of the options available. And when there are more options, when people can consider personal care homes, I think Justice would agree with me that, and you've probably seen this as well, Jim, the waiting list for the good personal care homes is as long as your arm. So
easily,
you know,
yeah.
the demand, it outstrips the supply by like 10 to 1. And so a lot of people, even if they wanted to consider the personal care home experience, they just don't have that option because the waiting list is years or certainly months. And we don't typically have months when we're making these decisions. So I think to the extent, Jim, I think you're absolutely right. To the extent that we can dive into this and kind of learn our way through it, those who get started now, maybe in a year or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5, will have kind of the track record and the understanding and the appreciation for how this thing can work, and that will serve them well as this wave of the silver tsunami hits the U.S. and this becomes everybody's concern and it's part of everybody's daily conversation. It's still kind of on the periphery now, but it's heading to mainstream at an alarming rate, and we're not ready for it. So I agree with you. And the beauty of us being investors is that we go where the opportunities are. And I'd like to believe that to the extent that we serve our clientele better, we get to make more money. So they're not at counter purposes. They are, in my opinion, the consequence of doing it right. Everybody doesn't necessarily love McDonald's hamburgers, but no one can deny that they are the best at delivering what they deliver across any industry you want to pick. They have the systems and the processes in place to deliver consistently mediocre food worldwide, and that ain't easy. And so to the extent that we can get started now thinking about how this should work and how we can be a part of that, I think that's the smart move. I think it is, you're right. I think we have no idea, I'll speak for myself, I have no idea where this is heading or what the right solution is, but I'd love to be part of the group of people trying to figure this out. And,
well, the thing is about this industry is like, it's very immediate, right? It's not like it needs to be, like once you have the facility, at that point, if you're a high quality facility, you're not going to have any problem unless you're out in the middle of absolutely nowhere. I mean, you have to be in the middle of, the next city is a few hours away. There's, a town of 1,000 people. Unless you choose a location just that poorly, you're going to find residents that are a good fit for that facility. So really the most difficult part is finding the facility. At that point, all the logistics are already ironed out. So it makes sense for the investor to get involved. At that point, it's all, it's up and running. It's licensed correctly to the Department of Community Health, and all the bells and whistles are done. At that point, it's almost immediate. You just have to fill the facility up. It's very and maintain a high quality of service, which really it doesn't. You just have to be somebody who doesn't, because when we hear about some of the stories in some of these places, these are things that are almost, flyer type scenarios, right? People putting their hands on residents and things like. As long as you don't do anything crazy like that, you're almost always, you're running a high service, and really that's not that difficult, right? You just have to cook food that you would eat. You'd have to cook food that you would eat your own self. You'd have to buy beds that you would lay in your own self, not things that you lay on and it's like cardboard. You'd have to keep the facility clean as if you kept your own house clean. As long as you did all those things, you're going to maintain. So at that point, really just having the facility, it's very immediate. You have the facility, those people will come, right? That sort of, they build it will come. I think I'm a big believer in that for this, because it's very self-evident when you walk into the facility. Oh man, this smells really nice. It's really clean. This bed is, I like to lay in this bed, so on and so forth. So it's very immediate. It doesn't take, of course, the logistics in terms of like what type of facility, that might be a little bit longer, because there's different types of residents you can take. You can take the memory care with the, that's just the only thing that you have to think about a little bit longer relative to the type of employees that you have. But other than that, it's very immediate, and that's what I like about this industry. It's very, you can see the impacts of what you do in real time.
So what I hear as saying, I think, is definitely there's a huge opportunity out there that's not being met. I think some entrepreneurs are trying to meet it, but no one's solved this problem yet. And even if someone has in Tulsa, Oklahoma, maybe they haven't yet in Atlanta, and certainly not in Charleston or wherever, but also there's a difference. If you're simply an investor and you're buying single family homes and duplexes and getting them rented, you're not, people might argue this, but you're not really an entrepreneur. You're simply an investor, because once that's rented, you're like, until I get the call that the toilet's broken, I don't care, ultimately, essentially. Whereas this is totally different, because you're an investor, because there's real buildings involved, right? There's real facilities involved, but also an entrepreneur. It's an experience that has to be created as well. And I think that comes down to a high quality manager. You have to, and really it starts with us, right? It starts, are we an investor who also is an entrepreneur who wants to create this experience together with the team that we put in place? And if not, then an apartment building is much better. But if so, I think a long-term care facility or age-in-place facility could be perfect, both as an opportunity and a way to do good and create that experience and create that service level.
I think you hit the nail on the head, Jim. That is exactly, I think, the challenge for us. And what you describe what you stated as the experience goal, love them or hate them. And I say McDonald's with not dismissal, that I admire and revere their concept, because what they've been able to accomplish is nothing short of phenomenal.
Plus the fries are really good. Can I go with that?
And they're good everywhere. I mean, they're consistently good no matter where you go. They taste pretty much exactly the same in Tulsa as they do in Atlanta, as they do in Miami. And achieving that level of consistency, it requires systems beyond what most people can fully appreciate. And there is no such national, and correct me if I'm wrong, Justice, there's no such national brand in the residential healthcare business. There are a few companies that are getting things going, but there is no, the experience that you just described, Jim, is very similar to the experience that you have when you walk into a McDonald's. The reason why people, when you're on the road and you have to go to a clean bathroom, you go to McDonald's because you know that the bathroom is always going to be clean, because they have a process for that. And, I always think to myself, well, every fast food restaurant could have the exact same process for a clean bathroom. Why is it that only McDonald's manages to get this done? And it's because it's important to them. They make it an important part of their process. So I think to the extent that we look at the idea of thinking about that experience from the standpoint of both the family member considering putting or introducing their family member into one of these facilities, as well as to the person that's going to be living in the facility themselves, what is that experience? How can we create an experience that's better? How can we incorporate the real estate and the healthcare resources and the technology to make this experience? I mean, all the great companies focus on experience. Disney experience, American Express experience. They all have, that is their thing. That is the thing that they are trying to control. From the minute you walk into their sphere until you leave, they want to control every aspect of that experience. And to the extent that they do that, those are the ones that we call the great brands. That's Apple. For the minute you pick up an Apple phone till you put it down, everything about it, how it feels in your hand, the weight, the color, all that stuff is designed to give you a certain boost. And that to me is magic. So yes, I agree with you. I think we all aspire, at least I think people on this call aspire to be not just investors, but entrepreneurs that are ultimately looking to create great brands that do good work, that deliver a quality experience to our client base. And this is an area that is ripe for that, because while there are lots of potentially great facilities scattered throughout the US, there is no consistency. You can't say, hey, I got this great facility in Tulsa, you should try them out in Atlanta, because it'll be a completely different experience, because there's no sharing of ideas, there's no bringing together of systems and processes, there's no management consistency. So I think that is the opportunity for what we're looking at. And I'm not sure that's even spoken of in the context of healthcare these days, but it should be. We should certainly give healthcare at least as much attention and care and concern as we give to a fast food hamburger, and yet we don't. And so I agree with you that is a huge opportunity. And to Justice's point, the cool thing about this is that it doesn't require a ton of resources. You don't have to have a PhD to to dive into this immediately.
Yeah.
There are operators right now who know tons about the healthcare part, but who know nothing about the real estate part. That's kind of where Justice and I are working together, is that we have come across quite a few operators who are really good at delivering their services, but are falling down on the ability to expand into more facilities or to get the most out of the existing facilities, because the real estate's not their thing. And so, and nor should it be necessarily. And so there's an opportunity there for that. And I think technology is another area where we could, kind of slide some of that stuff in and be beneficial to these operators who are uniquely focused on their healthcare experience. But yeah, I think that's a discussion that I'd love to continue to have. And I look forward to ways that we can collaborate and even here in Tulsa, I've started looking, in fact, I've started talking to some of the operators, personal care home operators here, because we're technically speaking, we're kind of in the Sun Belt, and in a place where people would consider coming to live and potentially age in place. And the real estate market here is fairly, relative to places like Atlanta, it's fairly inexpensive. So this would be a great place if we can find operators who are looking to grow, to at least see how far we can take that. And if we're doing that here and maybe in Atlanta and maybe in, the Carolinas, maybe there's an opportunity to weave or knit all this stuff together into some sort of greater brand that somebody who has vision in that area could put.
Yeah, I think that's where the discussion would go as a next step. Absolutely, because it's people who want to invest in this, want to serve this community, really banding together and at least comparing notes and best practices, right? At the very least, and maybe something grows from that, and maybe some partnerships grow or who knows what, but at least comparing best practices and saying, here's a little tidbit that works over here, here's something that works well over there. To Justice's point, here's how we prepare the bed and it's always perfect and it's always nice and it's always inviting. Here's how we do, the meal service, etc.
Absolutely. And to that extent, we are open, as always, to talking with you and any investors that you may be involved with, to have these kinds of conversations. The beauty of having this video is that to the extent that you can share this with others, then they can at least get up to speed on where we're going with this and what our intentions are. And if they want to be part of the conversation, then perhaps that's something we can explore down the road. But this is something that I am pretty much all in on. This is something that I'm pretty convinced is going to be where I spend the majority of my time moving forward. And so I'm always going to be up for a conversation about this. Justice and I are looking to do more of the podcast circuit, just to kind of get the word out, and to find other like-minded folks who are doing stuff like this and talking about trying to do these opportunities, pursue these opportunities, so that we can get some of these best practices and apply them to the operators that we're talking to. Because I don't think anyone has a line on where this is going to be in 5, 10, 15, 20 years. But I think it's fair to say that those of us who are in it now and can start getting into it now will have learned enough, will have earned the right, say 5 years from now, to be among those people who are deciding where things are going, because we'll have put in the hours now. So I'm looking forward to more of that in the future.
Absolutely. The sky's the limit on this one. It's wide open.
Yeah, I agree. And now we're really just talking about the U.S. We're just talking about the U.S. We haven't talked about what this means for other countries some countries are ahead of us and have already started to see their population age. But places like Australia and the UK, where you've got a similar kind of dynamic and similar, in my opinion, similar gaps in their resources, that perhaps once we figure this out, we can export some of that knowledge and wisdom to other markets as well. But yeah, I think this is going to be a huge opportunity going forward. And I'm just glad we had a chance to talk with you this morning about it, Jim. And we look forward to, if you have other forums that you think are appropriate for us.